I'm Nathan Gusdorf. I'm the Executive Director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. This is our first fall policy conference. The theme is creating an affordable New York for working families. And we're very excited to have a great group of panelists moderated by FPI staff. And this will be a discussion largely of what we think are the biggest issues facing working New Yorkers that are also going to have budget implications. So you're all on our list, so you must have some familiarity with FPI, but FPI is an organization that goes back to 1991, when it was founded to really be an authority on state fiscal issues. So we've always possessed expertise in understanding the state's finances, its budget projections, and tax policy, and we've long been a pretty essential resource for anybody who is interested or involved in the budgeting process, but especially legislative offices, advocacy organizations, unions, and other groups that have a real interest in how the budget debate goes down. They come to us for analysis, for policy recommendations, and that's been the case for many years. The pandemic was a little bit rough on FPI as it was for many other organizations, so over the past few years we've been rebuilding some of that capacity. And I'm excited to basically show off our very excellent staff today, who all bring their own particular technical know-how to this set of issues. So they're spread around the room, but we've got Andrew Perry over at the check-in desk. Andrew is our senior policy analyst. He's got over a decade of state and city fiscal expertise. Very few people really know the mechanics of the budgeting process and the state's financial planning, so we're lucky to have someone who speaks that language. In the back over there, we've got Dr. Emily Eisner. Emily's a full-on PhD economist. I think I like to brag about that more than she does. And it brings a very high level of know-how in terms of technical analysis, empirical analysis, understanding data, and understanding state economic trends to our small state policy think tank. So we're lucky to have someone with that level of expertise. Our most recent addition to the team is Michael Kanukin here in the front. Michael's our senior health policy advisor. He has a deep knowledge of Medicaid and long-term care. And as I'll talk about just a little bit, these are some of the biggest money issues in the budget, and they tend to plague every year's budget negotiations. So we're also very lucky to be able to now speak competently to state health spending trends. So if you've been following us, you know that a lot of what we've done over the past 2 years has been very fiscally focused. And I want to talk a little bit about some of our most important findings and research, and also talk about how that tees up today's conference. So every year we do a budget briefing that is basically a presentation of the governor's executive budget. And anyone who has any connection to the budget process is following along, normally in their own issue area, right? What are the proposed policy changes? How much are they spending? What legislation is on the table? I would say FPI is one of a very small number of organizations that really looks at how all the pieces fit together into the bigger fiscal trends. And you know, if you've been involved in the process, you know that that matters because the question is always really how much money is at stake, right? How much revenue does the state expect to have? How much is it spending? And how does it all net out? So you might be the world's foremost expert in some area of, say, mental health policy and know exactly why you need another investment of resources in a particular program. But when you go negotiate with the budget office, they're going to say, well, you know, we're facing a multi-billion-dollar deficit, so the big debate is what are we cutting? Sorry, there's no money. And without a fiscal expert to go to, it's very hard to respond to those arguments. So, you know, one way we think about ourselves is providing analysis, but there's an acute sense in which we're really sort of working with everyone to participate in that budget negotiation, right? How do you know what you need to know in order to be able to say, you know, how much money is really available, or what the real fiscal trends are? One really interesting project that we presented, I think just about a year ago, last summer, was a study of the state's budget gaps. So if you ever read any news article about the state budget or the city budget, it's going to talk about the deficit. And sometimes they'll talk about the deficit as though right now there's a deficit. The state or the city is in the hole and something has to be done to solve it. And so we really wanted to draw a lot of attention to the fact that that is typically a kind of mischaracterization of what's going on. The state and the city both do fiscal projections, as they ought to. They project what's going to happen over the next 3 years with the budget. And when they do those projections, just like you would do if you were budgeting for your home or for your business, they're a little bit cautious. And so there's typically a revenue shortfall that's projected. And we say, we don't even think that's a problem. We said, hey, here's kind of how it works. Here are the historical trends and patterns. And here's how they do these cautious revenue projections. But if you're talking about the press, say if you're a reporter or if you're an advocate, that's not a deficit. That doesn't mean that the state has run out of money. It's just how they do their fiscal projections. That got quite a bit of news coverage, and we were very happy to be able to play a role in changing a lot of the public discussion around what is really an issue of forecasting and has often been characterized as impending fiscal crisis. We've also done just thorough analyses of what budget cuts are on the table in any particular budget session, right? In this past year's budget that was done beginning of 2024, the governor came in proposing over $1 billion in cuts to Medicaid spending, about $500 million in cuts to education spending, and a few other cuts to programs. And so we really dug in, we broke down the shape of those cuts, how they would affect programs, and we also were able to place them in the fiscal context of that big picture of the state budget, right? How does this match up with expectations on revenue and spending? Are these really necessary? Are they in line with expectations? Is there more money on the table? And so on. So that is core FPI work. It always has been, and we love doing it. But we've also expanded and moved into some other programmatic areas and some sort of other forms of big picture analysis. So I think the most groundbreaking work that we've done was actually on migration trends, which was covered quite widely just in December of last year, and then a follow-up report later in the spring. And it was so groundbreaking because the first thing we looked at was what is often called tax migration. It's basically a myth, but a widely repeated claim that high earners, so the rich, the wealthy, but also just sort of people who maybe aren't super wealthy but have pretty high incomes, of which there are many in this state, are always moving away because their taxes are too high. Now, there's some reasons to initially be skeptical of this that we don't have to go into, but basically we thought it was not true, but we wanted to study it. What we found was indeed that group of high earners, they move out of the state much less frequently than every other income group, right? About 1/4 as often. This was a little bit different during the pandemic. The Senator Rivera shot.
I'm back.
So it essentially debunked this myth of tax flight by the wealthy. And really interestingly, it turns out that when they do move out of the state, they normally move to other high tax states, which if you've ever met a rich person is very intuitive. And they move to Connecticut, they move to California, they move to New Jersey, they don't move to Oklahoma. But that's what a lot of people used to say, and they still say it. But do you know who repeated our findings? Governor Kathy Hochul in her State of the State. Almost word for word, admittedly without attribution. But she still was essentially reading words out of our reports. So that was she didn't pick up all the policy recommendations. So that was a very exciting moment for us, and again showed the upside to really deploying the kinds of expertise that we've built up within FPI to do that work. Where that also brings us today, and we're going to get our panelists up here to talk about Medicaid in a minute, but we really want to drive into the programmatic spending areas, right? There's some sense that you might have, if you're at this conference today, that the state needs to invest more in right social programs, that there are a lot of needs. And so we've done all this work to basically substantiate the claim that is a real opportunity, right? That there are ways to raise more revenue, that can be done in a fiscally stable way. We speak to tax policy, to the various mechanisms by which it can be done. I didn't really introduce myself, but I'm a former tax attorney, so that's my particular interest, sort of mechanisms of tax policy. But where we wanted to drive this conference's work was really thinking about the major social policy and fiscal issues on the programmatic level. Right? What's really going on in Medicaid? What's really going on in child care spending? What are the needs? And how does that tee up the debates that we're going to have as we go into this budget and then future year budgets on investing in those areas? We have 2 housing panels today. Initially, there's going to be 1 housing panel, but it's such a huge and such a current issue that it kind of kept growing, and so we had to break it into 2 panels. Housing is interesting because it's the biggest affordability concern. You might wonder whether it's a fiscal issue. There are certainly less or non-fiscal issues in housing policy, like zoning reform, but our view has been, yes, it always gets a lot of play in a budget debate because the state tends to do major policy initiatives through the budget, and so you get debates over housing, but it's not always a focus of social and public investment. And so we've also been pushing the direction of saying, hey, here are the ways, it's important to spend money on housing, and here are the ways to do it. And we need to sort of reorient the budget debate to thinking about public investment in housing. So that has also entered our big picture agenda in a very salient way. With that, we're going to take a few minutes, get people up in these seats,